Greetings, you're listening to Guiding Stars Evolutionary Astrology Radio. This is your host, Kristin Fontana. Guiding Stars is an interactive, soul-centered astrology talk show using the symbolic language of evolutionary astrology to enlighten and empower you on this journey. We are this is our second stop in a series with David Green, and we have transitioned from internet radio to EA Zoom and YouTube for you to take advantage of some of these topics through these series and Guiding Stars. I'm so excited that Dave and I have initiated a relatively new series. This is our second stop called Finding Your Natural Voice, looking at the phasal relationship between Jupiter and Mercury in your chart. And so I would first just like to welcome Deva Green back to Guiding Stars. Welcome back, Deva.
Oh, thank you for having me back.
And we have been working together for many years on healthylife.net. If you found us there, we will be available now through YouTube via EA Zoom. And if you have any interest in other topics that we haven't discussed, or perhaps we've discussed, but it's been a long time, please let either one of us know, and we'll talk about getting it on a platform to discuss, and so you can take advantage of that on EA Zoom or YouTube. So, but today we are discussing again the phasal relationship between a pair of planets that we all have in our chart somewhere. They have a relationship to one another. Jupiter and Mercury. Most people know that study astrology rule the left and the right brain. Mercury the left brain and Jupiter the right brain. But before we jump into the specific Jupiter and Mercury phases, I wanted to talk a little bit with Deva about and share with you all why we look at the phasal relationships between any two planets and why it's important. Remembering that, of course, we've got a sun sign, we have a moon somewhere, we've got, of course, in evolutionary astrology, we look first to where's your Pluto, where's the nodal axis, but all of the planets in the chart are working in concert with one another. They work in pairs and they work in concert with one another to describe the evolutionary journey of the soul. And these planetary pairs fill in a lot of the blanks. And we thought it would be really cool to talk about Jupiter and Mercury, because so much about these planets and combination connect to how we express ourselves, what's our message, what's our truth, what is it that we've come here to say, what's our natural groove in terms of how we express ourselves. And so we're very excited about this series. And but before we get into the specifics of these two planets in the phase that we're discussing today, which is the crescent phase, Deva, I'd love to just talk about the significance of what the planetary phases and aspects mean generally. So I'd love to see that chart of the planetary phases and aspects. And this is a beautiful wheel, and it allows us to look at things a little bit more with greater ease, I think. I don't remember this wheel when I was learning the phases. I don't know about you, Deva, but
I don't remember this beautiful graph.
Also, because I didn't say this last time, but I want to talk about it today. The red, the white, and the blue, they all mean something. So we're going to dial in on those colors. I really would have benefited by this wheel with my Mercury retrograde. But I honed in right on those colors right away. So this looks like a zodiac. It looks like a wheel from Aries to Pisces, except for we've got a lot of different words here and degrees. And so this is the soul's evolutionary roadmap from 0 to 360. And this wheel reflects the principles of evolution, just like the wheel of the zodiac. It's no different than Aries to Pisces. So it's important to remember that when you're discussing a phase, so you can always feel the energy, planetary energy that we're discussing at this point. The crescent phase is today. You can see that down there around the second, third house. But what's different about this wheel is that the circle is broken into 8 sections instead of 12. We call them 8 primary phases, each separated by 45 degrees instead of 30 degrees. And this cycle of phases and aspects will tell you what stage of evolution your soul is in relative to the 2 planets that you are looking at, as well as how the 2 planets operate archetypically. So obviously we're just discussing 2 planets. It's not the whole journey, but a specific part of your journey. And to determine planetary phase that exists between any 2 planets, and today it's going to be Jupiter and Mercury, you want to find the slower moving planet in your chart. In this lecture's or webinar's case, it's going to be Jupiter as your starting point. And then you want to count counterclockwise, count the degrees of separation between Jupiter and Mercury in a counterclockwise fashion to determine what phase your Jupiter and Mercury in. And today it's going to be crescent phase. So if you were to put Jupiter at the conjunction here, where the red is at like 9 o'clock, if you're imagining a clock, but the 0 degree mark here, and count up to between 45 degrees and 90 degrees here, got the crescent phase. So that's what we are discussing today, if you have Jupiter and Mercury in a crescent phase. All right, what have I missed? I know I've missed a bunch, David.
Oh, and right, like as you were saying that each of these phases and aspects are specific gateways that the soul progresses through relative to the principle of evolution. So when you look at these phases and aspects relative to a planetary pair, you're going to see the level of development that that planetary phase is in, and that gives you absolutely necessary context to interpret that planetary pair and also the birth chart. For example, when you add the specific phase that any given aspect is in, that will add the necessary context to interpreting that planetary phase. There's going to be a big difference between a conjunction that's occurring within the balsamic phase and a conjunction that's occurring within the new phase. So it's giving the birth chart a necessary context in order to understand the evolutionary meaning, and that these gateways, you don't move on, or you don't move forward until you progress through these specific gateways. So it adds such a level of understanding in terms of how these planetary archetypes are in concert with one another.
Mm-hmm, definitely. And so again, just to reiterate, the point, this is important because the phasal relationship, whether we're talking about the second phase, it's pretty new, right? We're just coming out of the new, for example, the new phase, versus the last quarter phase. This is going to tell you how long your soul has been working on the dynamics, how long evolutionarily speaking. This is new, crescent phase, Jupiter, Mercury, a newer message. Actually, we discussed the new phase last month, but the crescent phase is really your soul is going to try and start to consolidate some of these things that you've been discovering, or bring it to form, I would say, in a very Taurian way, and root it somehow. Even though it's just come out of the new, you're working on baking that cake now. You've got more of the ingredients out on the countertop in the kitchen, you know, or what have you. It's a similar energy in that way. So how long has your soul been working on the specific intention reflected back at the Pluto paradigm? Mercury and Jupiter are not working independently of what your soul is trying to accomplish. They are showing ways to how, again, in this series context, to find your natural voice, to express it, to tap into it, tune into it. And it's really being woven into this Pluto paradigm, because we don't have separate parts of ourself. It's just a piece of the bottom line of the bigger picture. So in general, it'll take 8 lifetimes to work through the specific intention that is reflected in the main Pluto paradigm. Most people, it takes many more. I mean, you got to be really booking, as they say, to be able to accomplish an intention, a bottom line intention reflected in the Pluto paradigm, to take it were it to take 8 lifetimes, you are really working hard in every lifetime. So for most of us, it's going to take longer than that. And what I love about this wheel, by the way, so the red is kind of like the hard punch. It's the
Right.
square, it's the conjunction, it's the opposition. The blue is like, yeah, maybe like this is going to be, this is going to be a little easier here. I remember in school, Deva, I need a little Jupiter today, but too much Pisces energy lately, right? This Neptune, Mercury retrograde and Pisces, Neptune, Mercury conjunction. I gotta laugh at some of this chaos, but anyway, it took us a while to get online here today too, so we're just working our way through to clarity.
Right.
Anyway, the blue here is, those energies that are really gonna help support you, and to a greater degree. You think about the trines and the sextiles, and there's a really special aspect that we'll discuss a little bit, someone's chart in particular that has a quintile. It's a 72 degrees, nice little blue lines there. And I remember in the school, I was looking everywhere in my chart to try and find a quintile between any two planets. I didn't care what they were because it sounded really cool and really important to fate aspects, but we'll talk about it in a bit. So the white areas in this chart are not, quite as pronounced. The red energies are gonna, those aspects are gonna get you over the hurdle. There's gonna be a high degree of pressure there. And the blue is really gonna help you accomplish something with greater ease. It's not gonna be such a challenge and most of us have a combination, of course, of all these colors in our chart, if you want to call them that. So anyway, I love this chart. Thank you, Linda. Kudos for that. Anyway, the other thing to remember is that your soul can be evolving at different rates relative to different planetary pairs. So today we are discussing Jupiter-Mercury crescent phase, but you could have your relationship planets in a balsamic phase or in a full phase. And so it becomes quite an exercise to bring all the planets together in their different phases and try to make sense of all that. I mean, really, right?
Yeah.
It really take a lifetime to master that. I mean, it's really, that's why this work is so motivating, inspiring, because we're always working to cultivate and develop it further to deepen our understanding of what certain planetary signatures mean. So I'm looking forward to going deeper into this particular series that we're doing together. All right, so if I missed anything else?
Let's see. That's right. Looking at everything in context, seeing the different phasal relationships between different planets as well. To bring about that total picture and how this is one piece of the puzzle, or how it's one piece of the total picture. And by putting this together with, as you were saying, the Pluto paradigm, you're really able to speak to that client's reality, which gives it the depth, or which gives it the strength to really empower that client, or to be able to use their language. For example, again, drawing upon the example of a balsamic conjunction or a new phase conjunction, the type of language that you'll be speaking to that person, or the way that you'll come to understand, come to help yourself or others understand, that is very different than a new phase. So it really gives you that ability to speak to that client's reality. And to me, that's one of the essential aspects of astrology, is to be able to understand the reality of the client, to be able to speak language that they can relate to, or putting things in their terms. So that's another reason why these phases and aspects is so helpful, because it helps you understand the nature of the client's reality, and what to do to inspire, to motivate past difficult challenges.
That's really important. There's the phasal relationships between planets, planetary pairs, talking about the language you use. So if you're looking at this work and you're studying this particular series because you want to understand your client's charts better, that was perfect to say that, and so important, Deva, that the language that you use with your client, depending on what planetary pairs they have, especially a Jupiter-Mercury phase, is going to be really important in terms of getting through to them, motivating them, inspiring them, helping them understand where they are. If it's in a new phase, you want to empower them, to give them full freedom to discover whatever it is that they want to say and how they want to say it. Really create some space for them to tap into that feeling of freedom that they need. It's required for them to evolve, or else they're going to be getting angry along the way, right? If that new phase, Jupiter Mercury, gets limited in any way, it's going to, in an Aries fashion with the natural square Capricorn, they're not going to be happy about
Exactly. Right.
it.
Is
As a,
that, yeah. Exactly. I mean, one way to coach or through that too is almost because of the Libra polarity is just pretend nobody was listening to you, or just pretend that there's no audience for a minute, and what do you want to say? Really encouraging that sense of freedom in a way, without the fear of the response to the other. Because as you say, if they feel restricted, or if they feel that they don't have that freedom, that anger, that square to Capricorn can really come out. So yes, exactly. That's exactly the type of language to use to encourage and motivate in that new phase.
And Aries is meant to lead, not follow. And so again, it's like following their lead. That is what I remember your dad
Yeah.
used to teach all the time when you're sitting with a client. You don't want to say too much, when they're not ready for it. You're following their
Right.
lead by asking them, what is it that you want to know? Why are you here? What's important? What's up in your life right now? Versus you taking the lead on these things, because that can create setbacks. And
Exactly.
now, through the new phase, as we move into the crescent phase, there will ultimately be a progressive narrowing down, right? Because your soul is learning so much in that new phase about what you want, what you don't want, what you like, maybe you need to experience something once, and then the second time you're not feeling it. And so there's this progressive narrowing down, needing to have the experience, but some experiences you're not wanting to hold on to that way of being or expressing yourself. And so it narrows down, kind of like a funnel. And with the narrowing down, which takes time, it can give form then to what's been discovered in the new phase. And the crescent phase wants to isolate and stabilize. So they want to take all this information and funneling it down. And then, as I mentioned I love this idea about wanting to bake something or cook something. You've got all these ingredients in the kitchen out on the counter. Nobody knows what you're going to make until you start bringing it together. So now all these ideas, these thoughts want to take form. I mean, you're going 80 miles an hour in the new phase. And in the
Right.
phase, you literally come to a halt. And this occurs so you can create specific individual form.
Mm-hmm.
And until your purpose is realized, you can't go through the next gate. So, I mean, think about it. Aries to Taurus, just on an archetypical level, in terms of an archetype, Aries is full throttle and Taurus is literally like parking it, So obviously it doesn't happen overnight, but if you have a Jupiter Mercury in just the very beginning of this crescent phase, you're just, you're really wanting to, again, isolate, stabilize. Through the latter degree of a new phase, you're going to already take on that Taurian energy, but it really becomes solid and sound in the crescent phase. And the soul, I love this expression too. The soul comes to know what it is by remaining in one place in the crescent phase, right? Just by not going all over the place, but by remaining in one place, crescent phase. The soul will also begin to realize its purpose through the determinant of discrimination as well. And that happens, of course, at the tail end of the new phase, but for sure in the crescent phase, I'll do this, but not that. It's that fixed energy. There can be a fierce individuality in the crescent phase, like my way or the highway, take it or leave it. It can be very stubborn. I think Martha Stewart actually has the Jupiter Mercury crescent phase planetary pair there. And of course, I'm using this baking or cooking example, but it's very Taurian, you know, it's like really about bringing form to something and wanting to do it my way.
Mm-hmm.
Everything's done with one's own effort. There's usually not much external help here. And this is because it's the fine tuning of self-reliance that we see with the Taurus archetype. And so there can be cycles of a lot of bursts of energy and activity out in the world, and then cycles of almost absolute withdrawal. And so, you know, this can happen because the soul needs to go out to express whatever it is, or here, come into my kitchen and taste this, taste what I've made, you know, and maybe it's not quite right. So they've got to go out and try something else or tweak something in another direction. And so anyway, that is part of it. And, you know, maybe that burst out into the world would be a little bit deeper into that archetype, that Gemini energy that we feel, right? When
Right.
it's getting later into the crescent phase, needing a lot of options and different, just a variety of tastes or experiences in order to continue to fine tune your recipe or the piece that you've just created, the musical piece you've created, or whatever it is that you're doing with that aspect.
Right, and it feels that in order to accomplish that, as you were saying, that there can be a high degree of stress or tension as it relates to being a bit resistant to the external environment, or really a feel to not have any external influence, is because of that transition from the first house where everything is, or from the new phase, which is quite Aryan and going, and in a state of discovery and so on. And so when it reaches, especially the beginning parts of the crescent phase, and that need to slow down, or that need to consolidate, that need to root or ground, there can be like an instinctual resistance towards any external influence. It's like, no, you know, I want this, I want this to be my own. I don't want my ingredients to be, you know, to be influenced in any way. So there can be a feeling of almost being very protective, or
Oh, for sure.
or like a feeling of really not wanting any outside influence, unless it's to invite somebody in to taste the cake or the pie. That's okay.
Yeah, I thought of something too. You know, we we're talking about the need for the soul to know your purpose, what it is that you want to express, and how you want to do it by discrimination. It's through the Scorpio polarity here, right? Where you're eliminating the things that aren't working or aren't going to contribute to the way forward. And when I mentioned I'm not this, I'm not that, I love this Sanskrit expression, nete, which is, yeah, I'm not this, I'm not that. So there is going to be, again, this funneling down, this eliminating the superfluous, the fluff, or the stuff that does not contribute in some substantial way to what it is that you want to say, how you want to express something musically, creatively, in the kitchen, you know, whatever it might be. So
Right. Because that gift is really being able to take things down to a very basic, or it's almost like extracting a core meaning, or extracting a core essence out of whatever it is that you're doing. So it's really taking out, as you were saying, or really eliminating anything that doesn't contribute to that core, or anything that doesn't contribute to that foundation. So there can be, yeah, exactly, getting rid of everything that's not needed. And perhaps one way that could manifest too is, not in all cases, but it can be those who decide more or less to live a lifestyle of minimalism, of really only having what you need, and then the value that comes from what you have. You really value everything that you have. I mean, the sense of what those things then inherently mean to you, it becomes something very, you know, very different than what it once was, or from just collecting things. So there can be a high degree of focus too upon anything that you have in your life, kind of an essential meaning that it has. And it could also be the person that decides to, when perhaps if they have an experience of at first being in very tense situations of survival or minimalist, and suddenly they have an opportunity for more financial gain, it's like that value, in some cases, that the value that they have on those resources is quite different. They might desire to still only have in their life what they feel they really need, and not extra, or to give to foundations that they find are very meaningful for them. But it's that whole value association, and what things that you have in your life, what they mean to you, and so on. So it can really take it to that fundamental Taurian level, um, especially with resources and kind of keeping that basic root intact.
Exactly. And remembering too that, the Taurus archetype, so much about this energy is about your self-reliance and, again, not looking outside of yourself, for help.
Hmm.
A lot of that souls with this aspect want to discover what it is that they want to do on their own. So let's talk about some of these special little places in this crescent phase. The first one being the fade aspect is the famous Y in the road, actually, the 51-degree aspect. It was the second one I was thinking about earlier, but we'll get to the quintile in a moment. But at the 51-degree mark there, it's showing a blue line. It can be a time, Jupiter, Mercury could be at 51 degrees is when you have some type of contract you might have with another soul from another time. And you can experience fated moments that keep your soul aligned with that person, or it could be somebody that ends up helping you in the work that you want to do. It just feels like this really fated, serendipitous, Jupiterian kind of experience. And because of that kind of that natural connection and that experience, that the soul just knows that this was meant to be. I was meant to meet this person so then I could, be all that I came here to be. And so with that aspect, there can be a psychological relaxation that occurs. Think about it, Jupiter, Mercury, what we do with our mind when we worry, right? But what if the soul has this Jupiter, Mercury fade aspect at 51 degrees and effortlessly meet somebody that can help them in their life and their future? And then it creates this feeling of, this is destiny. I know I'm supposed to do that. So imagine in your life when you've been really confident about your path and you knew exactly what it is that you were meant to do, born to do, whether it's to sing, to paint, to cook, again, just to be an athlete, whatever it is that your soul is driven to do, to work with children. And the door just opened in a really big way. So that is a nice aspect. It's 51 degrees. We do work with 2 to 3 degree orbs, a little tighter orbs when we're looking at these specific aspects within a phase. Isn't that right, Deva? Is it 2 to 3 degrees? Or 1
Yes,
to 3?
it's two to three. That's correct.
Okay.
2 to 3.
So that can be a famous Y in the road. Just means that you don't really know. You're going down this road and maybe you don't know exactly which way to go, and then there's an experience that you have that feels so fated it becomes obvious. So anyway, this was the kind of thing we used to do in school. I just remember going through these phases and then everybody's hunting around for these special little aspects. Do I have one of those? And oh wow, that was fun. Good times. So anything else you want to say? We've got a couple other aspects, of course, the sextile, which is another blue zone, which, can really create a conscious understanding of this new evolutionary cycle and purpose that occurs through contrast and comparison. Like your soul can isolate yourself from the impact of the external environment at that time. But there is a nice energy here that allows you to more easily understand where you're at and what you're here to do. But the soul can also get very lazy with this aspect, potentially, if it's not requiring much effort, like the gifted athlete or the super bright student, that could totally happen with that sextile. And then they don't make the extra effort, right? Because I'm born with it, and I don't need to work as hard. And so that can create its own kind of problems.
Right. That's really the even though they're stressful, part of the good parts of the stressful aspects are that they keep the necessary amount of pressure on to ensure that you make the effort. And that's part of the dynamic of the crescent phase and Taurus archetype is always your own self effort is a critical aspect in that.
Exactly.
In order to either not rely on a resource that's only gotten you by minimally, but hasn't really brought out that full ability to self-care or to become self-sufficient. So part of that crescent phase could really be bringing out inner resources to affect self-sustainment and making sure that you put absolutely all the effort that you need into making that happen. And that the stressful aspects can keep that pressure on. And then when you reach those non-stressful aspects, as you were saying, it can kind of become like there can be an integration point, but there's also that danger of it becoming like a laziness or of a knowing that you have the capacity, but not making the self-effort to fully see it through.
I mean, I definitely can think of a handful of examples of people that I've just observed in my life, just with a certain kind of gift, and then having a certain degree of entitlement, and then the whole bottom dropping out. So you got to be real aware of that. And yeah, that's a real thing. As you know, we move deeper into that phase. And it's not this easy breezy energy in places. There can be a real fear of not knowing how to establish whatever structures or forms that you've created. How am I going to establish these structures into the existing society? And then as you move into the Gemini energy, there's a fear then of being limited by something, because that Gemini energy, as you pull through deeper into that phase, has a need for diversity, right? So they don't want to be limited. A chef doesn't want to be limited in how many ingredients they're using in a certain sort of a dish, or they don't want to be limited, but in terms of how many ingredients they can have in their kitchen, right? So it's the same kind of thing. And if you're deeper into that crescent phase, you're not going to want to be held to doing something either for 20 or odd years. I can't imagine somebody, for example, being a doctor with a Jupiter, Mercury kind of deeper into that crescent phase.
Right.
Because they're not going to want to do the same thing. They're not going to be wanting to be held to that. They really are going to need that diversity. Although being a doctor, I'm sure there's plenty of different areas of medicine where there is more of a diversity in terms of the patients you see. But there's a great degree of Capricorn sort of, I don't know, there's that duty, there's that, there's a feeling of having to work within a system that I don't think somebody with that aspect would want to be up for.
It's too stagnant, and it doesn't allow that re-expansion, especially that the Gemini intrinsically needs in order to keep evolving, so it can create a real crisis in regards to that soul's underlying sense of inner relationship with self. How am I going to fend for myself? It's almost like a question of flexibility. Like how do I then create enough room for me to keep growing within this if I don't have that diversity?
Exactly.
So it can be very, as you're saying, it can be very intense, and especially because when it comes to the former structure, that it would have to allow the re-expansion out in a way, or it would have to allow the dynamic of diversity to also be included in whatever system or structure the person does align with.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think about, of course, the first thing I think about when I think of Gemini is it being a writer, right? You have full freedom. There's nothing limiting you in any way how you express yourself through those pages. And so, that would be one example. And especially as we look at the quintile at 72 degrees, this is that energy that, it really is a special aspect. And the aspect is called creative transformation. And creative transformation through internal individuation. We also call it a Carl Jung aspect. You're taking something pre-existing and making it your own. Quintile, 72 degrees. And it's a highly favorable, it also has a quality of fate connected to it as well, like kind of destiny or destined to take something really far and forward, and in a unique way. It carries sort of an Aquarian vibe, even though we're not even near that house archetypically. It is a creative transformation. Carl Jung aspect, I think of course, Carl Jung was very groundbreaking in his work. So anyway, special little aspect there with Jupiter, Mercury to take note of. And one of our examples, we'll talk about that. All right, so, and then lastly, we've got to move into the crescent square, which is the most difficult, high degree of pressure there, high degree, I would say, of internal compression, this push-pull, unconscious fear of failure. We're banging on that Cancer door, right?
Right.
It's like insecure and feeling a bit vulnerable and not sure how you're going to be able to pull it off. And that is a cardinal energy, right? When we think of Aries, Cancer, Libra, Capricorn, it's this 2 steps forward, 1 step back, this push-pull. I have a high degree of confidence in something, and you kind of launch out there and you leap back and think, what the heck am I thinking? Who do I think I am? That kind of energy. And so there can be a high degree of insecurity. That aspect within the crescent phase is the most difficult. The 90 degree, or right before that, 85 to 90 degree crescent square. Any last thoughts before we jump into some examples? Do we think we covered them, most of them?
Yeah, in terms of how the soul will communicate too, bringing into the crescent phase that there might be more of a taking time, or more of a rooting or consolidating before speaking. So reflection, whereas in the new phase it can be very instinctual, without forethought. Moving into the crescent phase, there can be a high degree of consideration, or there can be like a time to almost check in with one's inner response to information that's coming in. How do I relate to it? So there's more of a Taurian processing time before communicating.
So the new phase is clearly yang, and crescent phase is yin.
Yeah.
And then we alternate all the way around the zodiac. All right. I feel like that's a good foundation. And we can go ahead and look at the next chart. This is my favorite example. Probably just because, this is somebody that was extremely innovative with how she went about her success, starting with not using her full first name, so people didn't know if she was a man or a woman in England. And J.K. Rowling, of course, wrote all the Harry Potter books and all that material, and it's just massive. And so clearly destined to put herself on the map and to, really go big as a woman in the world with her writing. Look at that, Jupiter and Gemini in the 4th house, right? Come on, that's like perfect. So as a woman, just being a role model for other women, and to hide behind gender, frankly. Her South Node is in the 10th house in Sagittarius, and the ruler's in the 4th. Nobody could judge her for her gender. You can tell that that's already occurred before. She has Pluto, Uranus, balsamic, in the 7th, squaring the nodal axis. And her moon and Saturn are opposing each other. Gender and not having their injustices around gender and not having a fair shake are really prominent. Just feeling totally powerless because of being a woman. Moon in the 8th house, opposing Saturn in the 1st in another lifetime, for sure. Feeling completely powerless. Look at all those balsamic aspects too of Uranus, Venus, Mercury in Virgo, all balsamic to Pluto. And then Pluto and the moon are in a new phase, this life of empowerment through her writing. So anyway, love this example here. Any thoughts about that, Deva?
Yeah, in terms of too her expression of her natural truth, seeing that Mercury is in Virgo in the 7th and Jupiter's in Gemini in the 4th, a quote she had which really to me also depicted in her own way kind of her orientation towards magic, 8th house. I mean, I would also say Saturn in Pisces, as she says, the true measure of a man is not how he treats his equal, but how he treats his inferior.
Right.
So to me, in terms of it being in the crescent phase, that dynamic of equality, Mercury being in the 7th of, in a way, magic can serve to unlock or to heal that power of disempowerment. All of a sudden, you have all the capacities that you've ever wanted. Being in the Taurus phase, it almost gives a way to rely on yourself or to access that sense of self-sufficiency through equality, or through, in a way, almost making that struggle or creating a world where there is equality, no matter kind of what form you're in.
Well, I mean, check this out with all the Virgo planets too. I mean, she went from a struggling single mom to a billionaire.
Right.
And writing the Harry Potter books. I mean, she's the wealthiest woman in the United Kingdom, well ahead of the Queen. And, so pretty awesome. Yeah. And of course, just anytime a woman's able to go from nothing to something and in that kind of dramatic way, I do feel like a pebble in a pond, and it inspires other women to do the same. But she did have to get creative with her entry. Like, I'm sure that when she was, sending her manuscript off, I mean, she probably thought long and hard about it. Well in advance of sending it off. I am not going to use my first name. I'm going to use my initials. They'll never know.
Right.
That kind of thing. So, a great example here. All right. Any thought? And we can move to the next one unless you have any other thoughts on her.
Let's see.
Oh, back to this. Yeah, we're just one more thing too. We were talking about the magic with the Jupiter and Gemini and Mercury and Virgo. Her imagination linked with magic. That Neptune and Scorpio, I don't know if you said this, is forming almost an exact trine to her Saturn in Pisces.
In Pisces.
So I think you mentioned both those symbols, but look at the aspect. Okay, this is about phases and aspects that we're discussing and how important it is.
Right.
How easy is it for her to be able to bring her imagination, which is unlimited, to a mainstream world through the trine to Saturn, and have it hit pay dirt? And it did. It has. And so the aspects, look at the blue and the green, the blue and the red in this example, mirror the blue and the red in the planetary phase wheel that we had earlier. These are natural colors, of course, that we understand when we're looking at the center of the wheel, stress and support. Anyway, that Neptune Saturn trine is, really about no limits to her success. And Neptune rules her 2nd house of how she earns. Neptune has to do with fame. And again, no limits. So you can see that here. And the Jupiter, obviously, too, is trining her Mars in the 8th house. And that Jupiter rules her midheaven, which is the highest point in her chart. It's the doorway into her career house. And that Jupiter rules her south node. I mean, she's definitely been someone who's tried to write, and maybe she had her work stolen in another life, or someone else put their name on it, or she wasn't able to bring it forward because she was a woman. So
Right.
this is a get your power back kind of life for sure. And that aspect was key. It was key to help make that happen.
And with the Jupiter Mercury being in the crescent phase, how with all the wealth that she continues to give, I think she's donated one of the largest amounts, is because she became the wealthiest woman in Britain. And it's so in terms of preserving or having her hold on to her root, that it was like she always remembered what it was like to be a struggling single mother, in that seventh house held on to that desire or that compelling need to serve others who are in true need.
Yes.
So it was like her able to stay connected with her root despite being recognized, or it was like that's one of the most beautiful parts of that crescent phase, that when there are all these different influences, especially with the seventh house, it's like it preserves to that inherent root. And
Exactly.
I find that very inspiring about her too, and how she, gosh, through her example, being a role model, how she's able to activate, or how she's able to inspire others past this very deep struggle.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
And just staying humble in her success. Of course, whenever we
yeah,
see sun in the sixth house, you're never going to be too big for your
free
britches.
riches.
There'll be always something to humble you, and
Yeah,
even if it's in your own mind, right?
right.
Sun in Leo, but it's in the sixth.
In the
So,
six.
wow. I mean, that Uranus transit, I'm just looking this again with Pluto balsamic squaring the nodes. That's just massive. That Uranus rules her entire chart and just doing something groundbreaking, totally just out of this world, really. And everyone had to have their hands on it. So, more power to her. That's all I got to say. All right, let's move on to the next chart. Neil Young, love him. So go ahead and start this one, Dave, if you would.
Yeah, in Neil Young's chart, he has Pluto and Leo in the ninth house. He has the South Node in Capricorn in the second, and he has North Node in Cancer in the eighth. And his Jupiter is in Libra in the 11th house, and his Mercury is in Sag in the first house, approaching that sextile in crescent phase. So listening to him in terms of recovering, or in terms of expressing his natural truths, he is very connected to nature-based forms of learning, to connecting to in a way it's like preserving a shamanic root that we hold together, preserving the welfare of the earth, very much a tribal, or very much speaking to the power of community. Jupiter being in the 11th house, Mercury being in Sag in the first, and South Node being in Capricorn in the second, very much orientated towards self-sufficiency, self-preservation. Um, One of the things that he did is he funded a school for children with special needs. Looking at the Mercury being in Sagittarius in the first, and that Jupiter in Libra in the 11th house. And he speaks to music in terms of one of his quotes is that he says you find your own. He says you find your own voice. You don't learn through copying or through imitating somebody else's, or through listening to others. Um, and when you listen to his music, you can really feel the value system that he has, or that crescent phase, in terms of preserving, coming together as a community, or really speaking to others, to finding their own sense of truth. Seeing that Mercury is in Sag in the first house. So to me, his root is very much centered in uh, a recovery, or the freedom to be able to speak your truth in an unrestricted way, seeing that it's in the first house, and linking that to a community, or linking that to a voice that empowered a group or a society or a community. North Node being in Libra in the 11th. One of the quotes he also has that to me really speaks to that is he says, you preserve and you cherish the bounty of Mother Earth, or else our children may have no tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So he's really speaking to that value system, or he's really speaking to uniting through communal needs, and in really speaking to the heart too of what's different or eclectic or not. It's that natural principle of unity and diversity, or the relativity of truth, with Jupiter being in the 11th house. So it really speaks to the heart of aligning with Pluto being in the 9th house, with your natural truth in such a way that it can serve the community at large, or that it's linked to a need within the community and allows a recovery of voice through that. So uniting through common values, especially with South Node being in Capricorn in the 8th. So very much very much a speaker of not being restricted in the discovery of one's truth, and it's close to that sextile. So there was a high degree of receptivity to also his ideas around new technology. He's a big proponent, or he's a big advocator of clean energy, looking at the 11th house. So there was a response that he had in terms of it being a sextile, or it being approaching a non-stressful phase of being able to preserve his message, or being able to root that in the context of speaking to groups who had common values, or who were energized by the new ideas, or at the 11th house, the uniqueness of his message.
Okay, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any lyrics for us?
Yeah, one of the ones I really like is a Heart of Gold. He's really beautiful. He says, I'm a miner still looking for that heart of gold, and I'm getting old. Oh, it's so beautiful. He says, I want to give, I want to live, but I'm still mining for that heart of gold.
I love that. Look at that. Obviously the Pluto, Mars, balsamic, and Leo, right? For the heart of gold. And the mining, wouldn't that be like a second house thing?
Absolutely. I'm still mining.
All right, cool. That was a great read on that. And again, it's moving into the crescent square for him. So he had a child with learning disabilities, right? Was it autistic or? Yeah.
Oh, right. I can't remember the specific disability, but that's what inspired him to found the education for children with special needs.
I think it's called the Bridge School in San Francisco. I went to a big
Yes.
concert for that fundraiser. Yeah. Well, awesome. Again, somebody using his resources, his platform to get the message out, to get the money where it's needed to help those that can't help themselves ultimately.
Right.
And so I love that. All right, let's move to the next chart. All right. Why don't you let people know who this is if they don't know?
Yeah, this is the chart of Chris Cornell, who was at first the lead singer of Soundgarden, and then ultimately broke away into being a solo artist, making his own albums. I'm looking at his chart. It's an unknown birth time, but looking at the Jupiter Mercury, it's in that one of the hardest phases you can find. It's in that square.
Right.
Jupiter being in Taurus and Mercury being in Leo. And one of this, in terms of accessing his natural voice, he speaks to maintaining or preserving the authentic creative process, Mercury being in Leo and Jupiter being in Taurus. That one of his quotes, he says, music should not be an egotistical process. He speaks to the heart of inspiration or creativity for creativity's sake. For it coming from a place of rooting or grounding in a sensual message of preserving one's creativity in an uninfluenced way. He also speaks to healing loss, that one of the biggest challenges he went through was an experience of chronic depression, like a feeling of holding on to a loss, and that music was a way for him to creatively rebirth himself, or that music was a way for him to transform that pain into a way that allowed him to continue to actualize himself. So with this Jupiter being in Taurus and Mercury being in Leo, there's a real strong drive to also help others along the same line. He met one of the. It's like he was using his fame to help promote others. He did that in a variety of ways. There was a homeless person that he saw in Seattle playing the spoons of all things.
Oh my gosh.
And he made dedicated a whole section of his music video, even made a song called Spoon Man.
Wow.
To highlight his creative capacity or talent, because it was coming from such an unfiltered and such it was coming from such a Taurian or such a baseline level.
I love it. Spoon Man.
Spoon Man.
Awesome.
And one of the two, in terms of his lyrics, he really is sensory oriented, or creates this beautiful. It's not just through the words, but through his writing, you can really get a feeling, or you can really through the senses. Taurus can be very much orientated towards the senses. One of his lyrics, he's talking essentially about shedding pain of the past, and he describes it as dark as roses and fine as sand. I feel you heal, and I feel your sting again. It's okay when you find your way and you see it disappear, because there will be sweet sunflowers. So he's talking about this rebirthing that's happening from like a shedding of skins almost, or like a release of pain of the past through that square, through that creative tension, relying on yourself, relying on your creativity, and very, very sensory oriented.
Oh yeah.
So
I'm glad you brought that up. It's really huge for that Taurus archetype. You know, one thing that we haven't mentioned that I feel like what could be a great example would be somebody who's into body work,
yeah,
right? Using their hands, and it could very much be a Jupiter Mercury crescent phase, especially, well, actually anywhere throughout that phase. But not to digress, that was definitely an example I wanted to mention. But you can see here with this Mars and Venus balsamic in Gemini, he's using his language, his words, his voice to try and bring to closure a lot of unresolved energy linked with relationships.
yeah,
That have been, anytime we see the Mars Venus balsamic, look at how close they are, within 2 degrees. I mean, it's like a full moon life, all life, your whole life linked with relationships. There's a lot of things that are unresolved that are finishing in that phase, and yet there's this hope for the new, right?
right.
And through his writing, he's able to express what he can't, or move energy and express what he can't make sense of, even at times. I think that,
Mm-hmm.
depression is the depression so often is a result of the past memories in the soul from the past that they just can't reconcile.
Right.
And especially being in Pisces in retrograde, it's like the degree of disillusionment, Chiron retrograde in Pisces with Vesta, opposing Pluto, like they cannot reconcile what happened. And so it just sits, like weights in every little
Right.
cell. And there's such a gravity. And the only way to really move the energy and the emotion that Saturn is trining his North Node in Cancer, is through this creative expression, through writing, through singing,
Right.
through sensing, through feeling, as much as he can to move it.
One a beautiful lyric he has is in terms of relationships, it's healing from a really big loss. He says, I hear you laughing and my soul is saved. On forgotten graves you cry. It's just, whew, in terms of moving the energy forwards or the things that you can't reconcile. So, I mean, he just paints these incredible, vivid pictures with words that are totally feeling based. Or totally sensorial. Yeah, the degree of disillusionment, he talks about that a lot too in terms of he broke up with not, he did it very amicably, but he was involved with a band, Armatech, I think, and he split up with them for irrevocable personal and creative differences. So I mean, in terms of
or irreconcilable, maybe?
irreconcilable, thank you. So it in terms of preserving or experiencing disillusionment too within the professional life, really wanting to hold on to that feeling of authenticity, or bringing out a message in a way that was personally meaningful and kind of untainted by external influences. So going solo, becoming the solo artist, that could be part of Mercury and Leo.
Yeah, very much so. Wow, that's a great example. So also that Mercury in Leo, is squaring Neptune on one side, Jupiter on the other. And because this Mars and Venus are balsamic in Gemini, I'm sure it's kind of a leftover from another lifetime. Just not being on the same page with other people, but having to try it anyway.
Yeah.
And then moving on. Of course, he went to Soundgarden and then on his own. So there's some themes here around finishing stuff, karma with others, but also breaking free into his own. You can see that a lot of places. Wow, I'm just noticing that even his Mars and his Mercury are in a sextile, crescent sextile. Think about that. So I know we're talking about Jupiter and Mercury, but his Mars, is that right, Deva? Do I have my degrees right? I think I do.
You
So
do.
yeah, that's a very supportive aspect for him to, really be able to pump out the songs, right? There's a
Yeah.
highly productive energy for a writer, I would say, being very creative. And so this is a great example of why it's so important to look at all the pairs that you can, all at the same time. We're talking about Pluto, Venus, balsamic. We've got another Pluto, Mercury in a sextile. We've got a lot of other things going on that once you start to practice with the pairs all at once, you can see a chart, that allows you to get a clearer picture of the journey in greater detail.
Right.
All right, well, let's move to the next chart. Angelina Jolie, we all know her. And this looks, oh yeah, she does have it'd probably be a wide sextile there. That's probably more like, you do the math.
17, 18,
Just
5
beyond.
degrees, just
Yeah.
a little bit beyond, okay.
That's fine, Linda. So anyway, I'll let you start this one.
Yeah, so in her chart, she has Pluto being in Libra in the third house. She has the South Node being in Gemini in the 11th, North Node being in Sag in the 5th, and her Jupiter is in Aries in the 9th house, conjunct the Moon, and also Mars. And her Mercury's crescent phase to, or Jupiter's Mercury crescent phase to Gemini, also in the 11th house. So looking at that in terms of uncovering her natural truth, it would be a soul who's very much, very much finding their natural voice through the courage to speak things that are at times unconventional, that are even shocking at times, 11th house, um, but that are very much reflective of uh, her her initiating her own freedom from expectations within relationships, seeing Pluto being in Libra in the third. So it's a high value around being able to speak what's authentically what her truth is, seeing it's in the 9th house, and bringing about different ideas, or bringing about a different ideas also in terms of uh, what your role can be, specifically as a woman, or the gender assignment, seeing that there's Uranus retrograde in Libra in the 4th house, and that's opposing Chiron in the 10th. And also seeing that Venus in Cancer in the 12th, and it's also squaring Uranus. So the initiation of uh, breaking into her own, breaking into her different ideas, or into ideas that were perhaps not always traditionally accepted, um, but really gave a different picture, or a different idea of how to how, how to have fame. North Node in the 5th house. Um, so there's a lot of energy here too around being able to speak to a diversity of people. Mercury and Gemini in the 11th, in an alternative way, presenting alternative ideas in such a way that they can help people also see things in a different way as well. So I mean, there's a lot of energy here. There's a lot of recovery through perhaps speaking in ways that are unconventional, but that spark like an individuation, or that spark like a mental growth. Um, I know that one of the key moments I remember she had is when she was together with Brad. Oh, and the Pavarotti, asking her when she was going to get married. And she said, when every orphan has found a home, that's when we're going to get married. In terms of, throwing off conventionality, or crescent phase, what really has meaning, what doesn't. Because very highly committed to empowering those who also either experience shock or trauma around their natural voice, seeing Mercury and Gemini in the 11th. So speaking for very communal issues, or for global, or global issues, seeing the 11th house. Um, and being able to impart ideas that again were new, through initiation, or through expressing her personal truth, um, in a very 11th house, or in a very unique way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think too, when you think about the roles that she's played in different films, where there's a lot of uh, trauma.
Mm.
In a couple of the movies, I'm thinking of Changeling and In the Land of Blood and Honey, I think it's called. Whew.
Yeah.
I think she directed that one or produced
Wow.
that one, but very intense. But just the role of the woman, and
Yeah.
both of those, the message, the teaching, just very powerful. Changeling, I saw probably 3 times. I never see a movie more than once, and it was one of those movies I couldn't sleep after for a while. The first time, in part because of what happens to this mother's, she's she's lost her son, so it kind of goes from there. But
Mm.
a big part of that, and that was based on a true story in history, and a big part of that was all these women were being locked up for the women that were trying to have a voice, were trying
Right.
to speak out about different things that were going on, whether it was abuse or what have you. They just got locked up, and she found a way to, she found the key and opened the door, so to speak, for women, and played that role. And there's a couple different stories that were going on in that film, but taking a really traumatic piece of our past or in history, or what is happening to women in the world, and wanting to uh, educate people on these things.
Right.
And again, also to this strong international signature. Of course, she's adopted children from different countries, so you can see that Jupiter in her ninth, the crescent phase to Mercury, is just going the unconventional way, right? Adopting is very much an 11th house signature, and Jupiter does rule her north node in Sag in the 5th, which is the house of children. So, there's obviously you can look at the Jupiter Mercury in many ways, not, in terms of, what is it, the message I want to say? I love
Mm.
what quote you pulled out. I'll get married when every orphan's been adopted. There's your Mercury retrograde in Gemini in the 11th, the crescent phase to Jupiter. It was perfect. So, that was a great quote to pull out. I haven't seen her in much recently. Maybe just raising her kids. I'm sure she's doing plenty, but anyway, any other thoughts on her?
Yeah, it's looking at, as you were saying, looking at the roles that she has too, specifically with women, how it's like it's almost like a way of processing, or looking at it from a different vantage point. Because in so many of those movies, there is a sense of going to the fifth house of self-empowerment, or it's like a way of recovering yourself through the trauma almost.
Right.
Because in the end, she's able to speak out for what is right, for what is just. She does have Mars in a wide trine to Aries, so it's that courage that Aries energy in the ninth denotes to speak, regardless of any past trauma or trauma that may be that you may experience, but it's that courage to speak the truth for the truth's sake.
Well, that Mars is making an exact trine to her Neptune. And
Oh,
so in
there we
terms of,
go.
healing,
Mm-hmm.
much, not only her own healing, but healing so many, playing a role to heal others through the work that she's doing.
Right.
Of course, she's just been torn apart by men and patriarchal ways in the past, with her Uranus retrograde in the 4th, squaring her Saturn in Cancer. You can bet she's been through the ringer in other lifetimes. I'm pretty sure that didn't she not have a good relationship with her father, maybe mother, father divorced or something. Again, there's just a lot of symbols for her becoming her own inner authority, for
Mm-hmm.
her just doing whatever is necessary to fight what she feels is fair, fight
Right.
for what she feels is fair.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, that was another area. Now, this is an example too. We're looking at a Jupiter Mercury. It is a kind of a wide sextile. She's got a lot of crescent energy, which strong themes around self-reliance. We know that she's a very strong, independent self-reliant woman. She's, all of her success, she's sure done on her own. And of course, the Saturn and the Venus in Cancer on the 12th house is going to require a lot of doing things on her own, inwardly, emotionally, maturing in that way. And so it's important to, again, to look at, what are the intentions? Of course, she came in as a messenger through film with her Pluto in the 3rd house, the ruler in the 12th. It's all about her message being on film and talking about injustices with Pluto and Libra retrograde, and being able to be a voice for that as it opposes Mars, whether she's talking about a woman's child who's been kidnapped and what end she goes to find him or to persecute that person, to movies about war in other countries, to where women are involved and what happens to them there. I mean, there's of course many films that she's done where this theme surfaces, of course, probably as a result of some past life she's had that her soul's working through, healing some of that. But so you see that there's stress in places, enormous stress in places with the Pluto-Mars opposition. That's a full phase opposition. But then that Mars is trining her Neptune. So it's important to combine everything that you possibly can. It's like checks and balances. There's angles of strength, which we've seen, through the blue area and that planetary phase map, to the stress, those areas where there's red. And so it's important when you're looking at a chart that you really combine the strength with the stress to understand what that soul is up against, and to talk to them about the ways that they can experience relief or breakthrough or support, to lean into those areas where you can actualize or access that relief. It doesn't always have to feel like a conjunction every day, whatever it is that your soul is working through. And this is the benefit, the true benefit of the planetary phases, because there are many other planetary pairs, I would say, involved in one chart that you can, when combine the whole thing, you can find avenues that are easier for somebody to experience more growth instead of getting stuck in a fear place because of what may have happened in the past.
Exactly, especially looking at this chart, synthesizing that together, looking at the Jupiter, Moon, Mars, all in a balsamic conjunction in Aries in the 9th. I mean, that would certainly, and it's the Mars opposing Pluto, as you referenced, that could certainly create like a capacity to heal fear from the past balsamic phase, to initiate or to bring about changes that she felt would help her actualize her destiny, making that trine to the North Node.
Exactly.
So perhaps confronting situations that had happened in the past, but her approach to that was fundamentally different, Mercury being in the 11th, than they were in the past. Because sometimes the balsamic phase can bring that about. You can re-experience something of your past, can recreate it, but if your response to it becomes more resolution based or not getting caught in that fear place, you can go through it in a fundamentally different way. It's almost like a feeling of knowing that you're in a process of healing or culmination.
Also, gosh, look at this Mercury and Uranus. She's got a lot of retrograde planets, but Mercury, which is part of this, of course, series, Jupiter, Mercury, but Mercury's a lower octave of Uranus. Uranus being the higher octave of Mercury. They're both retrograde. Uranus being in the 4th, which is all about the unresolved emotional trauma. Whenever you have Uranus retrograde, Uranus connects to the long-term memories that your soul has that are held in the cells of your being. Mercury is more the short-term memory part of things. And that long-term, if you have Uranus retrograde, there are so many tripwires in the world that can activate the unresolved trauma from the past, whether it's a song, a word, a smell, a little experience that appears minor could become major under that. So within that, and they are trining one another, there's a way, as you said, you can work through things, even being conscious that you're working through old traumas. And for her, it would have come through playing a role in a movie, perhaps, where she's that woman where all these things are happening to, whatever it might be. With that, her natal Uranus, of course, squaring her Venus in Cancer in the 12th. So, you know, having a more objective or detached, right? Like you are observing yourself as this person, and it's serving to help you heal the unresolved traumas that have created so much emotional short circuiting. And so, yeah, that is an important piece to remember as well, with the retrogrades. And she's, you know, the classic Mercury retrograde always is I've come here to recover my voice, or recover a memory, or recover something that feels unfinished that I wasn't able to say before.
Mm-hmm.
I want a place to say what I want to say, and I don't want anybody to stop me this time. So anyway, this was a great example. Any final thoughts about Angelina?
She can too, through the movies that she plays, it's like a reorientation to the feminine archetype, perhaps overcoming past anger. But it's like this channel's opening up to rework that, or to heal any distortion of the feminine that would specifically be linked to past relationships with men.
Yeah, excellent.
Giving it a reworking, or giving it an avenue to self-empower and to recover, and to find her voice, or to say what she needs to say, or to recover a message that she hadn't been able to say before. So it can really help heal the distorted, the anger that can come up from the types of experiences that are indicated in the chart. Reworking, a platform to rework.
Excellent. I agree. All right. These were wonderful in various ways. Of course, we had some crescent square energy. We had the wonderful 72-degree aspect with J.K. Rowling, which is a creative transformation, has a fate quality to it. And we had the sextile here, kind of a broad sextile here with Angelina. So you can see within a planetary phase, there's different aspects. And the aspect really is only understood when you know the phase that it's in, right? Because that same kind of aspect can be occurring on the other side of the wheel. So it's important to know where you are in the wheel before you dial in on that aspect. And so we started with the new phase. There are 8 total. We've got the crescent phase done now. We're at number 2. And next month, I think it's around the 3rd week of April, I believe, on the 20th of April, I think. Dave and I will be back here to discuss the first quarter phase. If you have Jupiter, Mercury in the first quarter phase, tune in there. And yes, if you are interested in learning more about evolutionary astrology, we do have a wonderful website where you can participate in practice threads or post questions. There's a message board there at schoolofelevolutionaryastrology.com. If you're interested in becoming a more serious student, we just gave you a taste of what the depths of where you can go with this wonderful work. There is a correspondence course available, which is the original course taught by the founder of EA, Jeff Green. The course is 27 DVDs that are sold in 3 segments. You can buy them separately or all together, 9 DVDs per segment. So check out the website if you're interested. And again, if there are any topics in EA you would like us to discuss, you can go ahead and contact either one of us. We're happy to field any questions about today's webinar, and we look forward to moving through this series together with you all. All right, David, thank you so much, and thank you, Linda, for all your help, and we will be back with David next month. I've got Ari coming up here again for another Chiron dance. I believe it's going to be a Chiron in Cancer, yes, coming up here in early April, so looking forward to that as well. All right, until next time, namaste.